Amid tensions over Korea and Iraq, the churches come together to plead for peace. Good evening. War is not inevitable. That is today's Christmas message from church leaders, in stark contrast to US warnings of the war on terrorism fought on two fronts. Saddam's message to the people of Iraq today: prepare to die. And the Queen's message: a great jubilee, some sad losses, and no mention of butlers. The growing prospect of a war with Iraq has dominated most of today's annual messages by religious leaders. Senior figures from two of the main faiths in Britain described their concerns during addresses, whilst the Pope spoke of the ominous smouldering of conflict in the Middle East. This Christmas Day, the Archbishop of York was the most senior Church of England cleric to speak publicly, wasting no time in addressing the growing crisis in Iraq. He said using war to resolve international disputes didn't fit with the Church's teachings, but Iraq's disregard of UN resolutions might make some form of military intervention inevitable.
Like many of you here this morning, I remain grievously troubled and concerned, and not least for our armed forces and their families at this time. So we must continue in our fervent prayers for a peaceful, diplomatic and political outcome.
Tomorrow, the Archbishop of Canterbury goes one step further in a radio address referring to the victims of war.
Communications are more effective than ever in human history. Analysis of national and international situations becomes ever more subtle. Intelligence and surveillance provide more and more material. We have endless theoretical perspectives on human behavior, individual and collective, and still the innocent are killed.
The head of the Catholic Church in England and Wales had a similar message this morning, but he went on to urge followers not to assume that all-out war could not be avoided.
We must never give up and assume that war is inevitable. Let us pray today, therefore, that each one of us, and particularly those involved in international diplomacy and politics, will maintain our permanent commitment to building and maintaining peace in our world.
And that message was clear in Vatican City, where an obviously frail Pope John Paul II delivered his annual address from St. Peter's Square. Without specifically naming any countries, he called on all world leaders to work towards peace.
In the Holy Land, we need to put an end once and for all to the senseless spiral of blind violence. And in the Middle East, to extinguish the ominous smouldering of a conflict which, with the joint efforts of all, can be avoided.
So, whatever the denomination, the message from many religious leaders to their followers this Christmas was the same: to pray for peace in the coming weeks and months. In her annual Christmas address, the Queen looked back on a year of highs and lows, and one, she said, that had been about as full as she could remember. She said the public support had been important to her in a year when she said goodbye to her mother and sister, celebrated 50 years on the throne, and saved a butler from a potentially damaging criminal trial.
Despite injuring her knee, the Queen dispensed with a walking stick as she joined other members of the royal family for the Christmas service at Sandringham. Buckingham Palace say the Queen's making a quick recovery from a strained ligament, but as she made it clear in her annual message, it's been a year of hard knocks for her, as well as some notable highlights.
As I look back over these past 12 months, I know that it has been about as full a year as I can remember. But Christmas itself still remains a time for reflection and a focus of hope for the future.
The Queen reflected on two great losses for her this year, the deaths of her sister, Margaret, and of the Queen Mother.
Many of you will know only too well from your own experience the grief that follows the death of a much-loved mother or sister. But my own sadness was tempered by the generous tributes that so many of you have paid to the service they gave to this country and the wider Commonwealth.
The message included colourful images of this year's Golden Jubilee. As the Queen's scriptwriters saw it, this royal occasion represented a coming together of a diverse, modern Britain.
The celebrations were joyous occasions, but they also seemed to evoke something more lasting and profound, a sense of sharing a common heritage, enriched by the cultural, ethnic and religious diversity of our 21st century society.
There was no reference to the theft trial of former royal butler Paul Burrell or the revelations that followed the collapse of the case, but it was a sombre broadcast.
Our modern world places such heavy demands on our time and attention that the need to remember our responsibilities to others is greater than ever. It is often difficult to keep this sense of perspective through the ups and downs of everyday life, as this year has constantly reminded me.
And now for a look at some of the rest of the day's news. The Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein said his people are ready to die as martyrs. He told his people that although weapons inspectors would find nothing, they should get ready to die in battle. And those inspections continued today. More than 100 UN inspectors turned down the chance to rest and celebrate Christmas. 5 teams searched several undisclosed sites in central and southwestern Iraq. Israeli soldiers have killed a man they say is a senior Hamas militant. They shot Ibrahim Abu Hawash during a raid on his Nablus hideout in the early hours of this morning. With Bethlehem under Israeli control for the first time since 1994, town leaders went ahead with midnight mass despite cancelling many Christmas festivities in protest. Israeli soldiers pulled back from Manger Square in front of the Church of the Nativity, but stood their ground outside the town at checkpoints. For the second year in a row, Israel banned the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat from attending, charging that he's done nothing to stop attacks against Israel. An empty chair in the front row of the church symbolized the absent leader. Bad weather in the United States has been blamed for 13 deaths, all in motor vehicle crashes. A snowstorm stretching across half the country means Americans from New York to Texas are enjoying a white Christmas. But thick ice forming on top of the snow has made roads treacherous. Forecasters warn many states may see another half metre of snow in the next couple of days. One of Britain's most controversial censors, who once called for the legalisation of hardcore pornography because he said people preferred sex to violence, has died at the age of 72. As the former chief censor James Furman spent 24 years infuriating both filmmakers and decency campaigners alike, he banned the likes of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and made cuts to the video release of Trainspotting. But he passed films such as Crash, The Last Temptations of Christ and Lolita because he felt that they had artistic merit. When he stepped down, Mr. Furman advised his successor, get hold of a flak jacket. Sport now. High hopes for England's cricketers to salvage a scrap of pride when they take on Australia in tomorrow's 4th Ashes Test in Melbourne. Australian batsman Darren Lehmann is out with a leg infection, joining Shane Warne on the injury list. However, going by previous performances, England have a great deal of ground to make up if they hope to avoid being 4 down in the series.
England have been in Australia for nearly 2 months, but in case you've missed what's happened, this one ball from Brett Lee to Alex Tudor sums it all up. They've been clobbered. In fact, it's probably the worst tour to Australia by an England team in history. They're already 3-0 down after 3 tests, meaning the best of 5 series is over and the Ashes lost yet again. For Nasser Hussain, it's been an ordeal. This temper outburst surprising in its restraint, considering everything that's gone wrong. And tonight it gets harder. England play Australia in front of 100,000 people in the fortress of the Melbourne Cricket Ground. The only positive thing to say is this man isn't playing. Shane Warne has dislocated his shoulder. And maybe fresh rumours that Steve Waugh is about to call it a day could distract him from kicking England as hard as he might when they're down. But the tourists, as ever, have their own woes. Alex Stewart has a problem with his hand. Don't bet any of your Christmas presents on anything other than more Australian celebrations.
The weather now. The satellite shows a bright arc of cloud in the Atlantic to the southwest. This will bring some rain overnight to many parts. Tonight a mostly dry and chilly one in the north, with some cloud and rain edging northeastwards. Further down it'll be mild with some brisk south to southeast winds. Tomorrow, a low-pressure system will bring an unsettled day with showers and longer spells of rain. Breezy across the north and still fairly mild everywhere. The rainfall chart shows more rain appearing in the far southwest by the end of the morning. Chances are you are at home spending Christmas with friends and family, but what about those who find themselves away from homes and loved ones? Army Santa managed to find British troops stationed in Afghanistan. It was welcomed by some rather intimidating-looking elves. Cosmonauts on board the International Space Station missed out on presents and pudding, but had this message.
We may be only 250 miles from home, but it feels like the longest 250 miles in the universe. And those miles seem even longer now during the holidays.
Back down to earth again and to inevitable Bondi Beach in Australia. Locals were joined by a host of overseas visitors, including Brits, Canadians, Swedes. Somehow the sun and surf subdued their longings for home and family.
We don't care about them right now. Yeah, we know they are like freezing, so we feel sorry for them. We are here having a warm, great time. So actually we don't care so much.
Now, before we go, a look at this year's alternative Christmas speech. Going head-to-head with the Queen was Sharon Osbourne, wife of Prince of Darkness Ozzy, matriarch of this year's most eccentric family. Sharon reflected on past year, including her battle with cancer. She revealed she'd bought Ozzy a first edition of Bram Stoker's Dracula, gave some advice from the hearth.
You know, kiss your mom, kiss your dad, kiss your brothers and your sisters, and, you know, it's very important to love your family, and especially at this time of year. It's the one time that is so important that family are together, and just give each other a big kiss. And I wish England a lot of sunshine, because they don't get much. I wish that they had half of what we had, because it makes everything better, doesn't it?
You're watching Channel 4 News. Main headline tonight, church leaders delivered a clear Christmas message today. War with Iraq is not inevitable and must be done more to stop it happening. In his annual address from the Vatican, the Pope said politicians should dampen down the ominous smouldering of a conflict which can be avoided. We're back 7 o'clock tomorrow night. Till then, that's Channel 4 News. Hope you're having a happy Christmas.